Probably all over the world, there's thousands and thousands of people doing exactly the same as we're doing tonight. And really it's all about raising a glass to Robert Burns or Robbie Burns, as we know from Scotland. It's a night of bagpipes, haggis, whisky, or other drinks. And one of the highlights is meant to be the Immortal memory. Well, if we'll wait to the end of what I say, then you can decide whether it's a highlight or not. Now, I suppose I was wondering, why was I asked? And there's a few reasons. Number one, Brother Mackay asked me in his usual persuasive way about what he did with Fitzy. But I thought about it and I thought, well, actually there is a couple of reasons why I'm here. Number one, I'm Scottish. Number two, although I was initially brought up in Glasgow, I spent my teenage years in Ayrshire, basically living in the heart of Welsh country and being educated down there. Our family house was built in the early 1700s, and Doug Shield over there, he's been there, and it's almost the spit of Burns Cottage, you know, the big long building, apart from the thatched that's gone long ago. It was a blacksmith shop, and a wee small byre at the end for keeping the coo in, so you had fresh milk. And we understand actually it was visited by Burns and various other dignitaries at that time. Shanta Farm, and God mentioned Tam O'Shanter, and he enacted Tam O'Shanter. That's just less than a mile away from the house, and so it's a real place. Therefore, also, there's a village called Kirkoswald, because this area is Kirkoswald and Maidens Parish, which was all part of the Burns folklore. And in Kirkoswald, Burns' mother, Agnes Brown, that was where she came from. Other characters, Shooter Johnny, Curtin Jean, Tam O'Shanter, they're all buried in the churchyard there, so there were real people. Now, Tam O'Shanter, that wasn't his real name. His name was actually Douglas Graham, but he was a famous drunk from Shanta Farm, so hence where he got his inspiration from. And in Kirkoswald, I spent many and many a night drinking in the Shanter Hotel, and at the end of every night we would finish up singing the Star of Robbie Burns. So, kind of, I suppose I'm a wee bit qualified to be speaking here tonight. So, what about Robbie himself? Born in 1759 in Alloway, which is just a couple of miles south of Ayr. His father was a man called William Burness, who actually came from Kincardineshire. He was from Dunnottar. His mother, Agnes Brown, from Kirkoswald, as I said. Robbie was the eldest of 7 children. 2 of his 3 brothers actually died before he did, and so they died at a young age. The family were poor tenant farmers. William Burness was always moving from farm to farm to farm, but never quite got it right. But his dad was self-educated, and he was a great believer in education. So he pushed Robbie, but ironically, his formal education finished when he was only 9 years old. And then he was brought home to work in the family farm. At the age of 15, he wrote his first poem, or the first one that we know of. And it was to a young lady, of course, called Nellie Kilpatrick. So obviously, as Fipsy mentioned earlier, he saw this route into her embraces, or whatever we would like to call it. So, in 1775, he moved back to Kirkoswald, and he was there for a few months, and that was to complete his schooling under this guy called Hugh Roger. And ironically, the site of the hotel was where the schoolhouse was, etc., etc. And Hugh Rogers also buried in the same churchyard. So, Robbie himself, a poet, a lyricist, a romanticist, a realist, a rebel, a ladies' man, as we all know, radical, but he was also a husband and a father, eventually. But why is he immortal? Because Was it his poetry? Was it the trappings of the culture at the time? Was it his bad boy celebrity image, as we see a lot of these things today? And it's probably a combination of all of these. But a bit like Billy Connolly is today, he was an observer of life. He saw everything that went on and round about you, and he'd no airs and graces. He was in touch with the common man, and really I suppose that's what made him who he was. And this can be seen in his poetry. And if we look at Of Mice and Men, that's where he was comparing man himself to that of a mouse. And it goes, "We sleek at Cowan, timorous beastie, oh what a panic's in thy breastie. Thou needna start a was so hasty with bicker and brattle. I would be laith to run and chase thee with murdern prattle. I'm truly sorry man's dominion has broken nature's social union, and justifies that ill opinion which makes thee startle at me, thy poor earth-born companion and fellow mortal." So this is him saying, you know, we're all the same. So I'm then going on to Burns the Freemason. Now, I think you mentioned it, and it's been mentioned by other people tonight. Now, Douglas, you'll probably know better about this. He was initiated initially into Lodge Tarbolton, Kilwinning, which is now number 135. Mm-hmm. There's a bit of a history in that, where it was 174 and 178, and they were all split up and all the rest of it. But 135 says this is Burns' Mother Lodge. He was elected to Deputy Master in 27th of July 1784. Now, the Deputy Master, as a Deputy Master, you know, he's not the chief. However, the Master was a gentleman by the name of, now what do I get this, Sir John Whiteford, or we'd say Whiteford now. And they said it was an honorary position, so maybe yours is an honorary position, I don't know. So Burns was actually, in effect, running the lodge. And according to records, he ran it very diligently. He signed off in 29 different meetings. And so he took it very, very seriously. And I think the important thing there is he actually, this whole thing about all men being equal, this was part of Burns' culture, this is what Freemasonry is about. And, you know, he saw everybody being the same, there's no such thing as high and low classes. And again, we see that in his poetry. And there's a poem, The Twa Dogs, which is where you've got a posh dog and you've got a non-posh dog. So one's owned by one of the gentry, the other one's owned by a ploughman. And it's the final line of that. It says, "When up the gat and shoot their lugs, rejoice they weren't men but dogs." So what it's basically saying is, they're really glad that they weren't wishing to be high class, because it's better to be a dog than to be a person. Now, he also pointed out, while some distinction between the classes probably is important to some, it's not to others. And again, in his poem To a Louse, where there's a fine lady has a louse crawling up her beam, and it goes, "How dare ye set your foot upon her, sae fine a lady? Go somewhere and seek your dinner on some poor body." Excuse me. "It wad some power the gift to gie us, to see yourselves as others see us. It wad frae money a blunder free us." Now, perhaps Mr. Donald Trump might be able to take a question on that, if he could only see what the rest of us see. But there you go, we're not Americans. So. He also wrote about the potential of all people, and the poignancy and the unfilled potential. And he put it, you know, creating a shining light on humanity. So again, on his poem, "What thou on Hamley fair we dine," which is referring to the Burns supper we've had tonight, "we are hodden grey and all that." Now, hodden grey was almost like a sackcloth. Gie fools their salts and knaves their wine, a man's a man for all that. So we're all equal. Their tinsel show and all that. The honest man, though e'er sae poor, is king o' men for all that. But he was also a romanticist, as again Phipps told us. Me, 12 children, four different women. Now, only 3 of his children he had to his wife, Jean Armour, actually survived infancy. And in total, I think it was 5 of his children survived. But he has, as of 2019, there were over 900 direct descendants of Burns. So he was a busy boy. And so when you lucky boys, just obviously they hadn't found rubber at that time, or in fact Durex hadn't come about. Could you imagine, and I suppose when you think about it, yes, the CSA definitely wasn't around then. But as I say, romanticist. So you look at his poem: "My love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. As fair thou art, my bonny lass, so deep in love am I, and I will love thee still, my dear, till all the seas gang die." So, while Burns famous worldwide for his poetry and his way with a woman and his words, he was also very well known for his liaisons with the opposite sex, and, as I say, fathered 12 children. Now, my mum, who's a Sassenach, by the way, she's a Geordie, and my dad used to talk about a Geordie's purely a Scotsman with his head kicked in. So maybe she's more Scottish. Anyway, I mean, could you imagine today if Burns was still alive, the effect it would have on social media? 97 women have come forward claiming that they've been abused, sexually abused by this man, and I don't think they would, because he would just write a wee poem and say there's a lot of nonsense. I paid for it actually. Yeah, so as I say, that was him, the romanticist. And his father, after moving from Tennessee to Tennessee, eventually died in 1784, and that's it's at that point that Rabbie starts writing most of his poetry. So over that, almost like a 2 or 3 year period, a mass of poetry was actually produced. And together with his brother Gilbert, they took on the tenancy of another farm, but it didn't work out, and eventually he moved to Mauchline. I think that was I can't remember if it was Mount Oliphant was up there or yeah. Anyway, they moved to a farm in Mauchline where he met his wife. And in 1786, his wife had twins. They weren't married, or maybe they were married, but her father was sure that they weren't getting married. So again, in 1786, he buggered off to Edinburgh, and he would be the toast of the town. Now, you can imagine all the fine young ladies in Edinburgh, and this man with all this way with words. I'm sure he was keeping the maidens happy, and he was probably keeping some of the wives of the dignitary of the day happy. And so anyways, after being wined and dined, but his fortunes, albeit that he produced a Kilmarnock edition of his poems and all the various things, he still wasn't a rich man. So he returned in February 1788, resumed his relationship with Jean Armour. He married her in 1788, and then he had another set of twins. He then took up a residency in Ellison's farm in Dumfries, and that's basically him moving to Dumfriesshire where he eventually died. But he also took up at the time a trainee position as an exciseman, which today would be like HMRC, and which was totally contrary to all his beliefs. But maybe it's one of these things where if you can't beat him, join him. And as I said, he was a husband and a father, so he had to make a living, and that was basically how he was doing it. But he also made a bit of a fool of the whole situation, and his poem, the deal about the deal in the excise man, and it goes, the deal come fiddling through the tune and danced a war with the excise man, and Ilka wife cries, "Old Maroon, I wish you luck with the prize man. The deal's a war, the deal's a war, the deal's a war with the excise man. He danced a war, he danced a war, and he danced a war with the excise man." So basically saying, you know, everybody should hate me because I'm an excise man, but they loved him. They absolutely loved him. So he continued as an excise man right through his death, although latterly he couldn't really carry out his job and he had his wages cut. Now, again, as I say, he was a radical, he was anti-establishment, he was everything. Yet in 1795, the year before his death, he joined the Royal Dumfries Volunteers, and he was a supporter of the American and the French Revolution, and which again ran in the face of all this. And I suppose his earlier work as a farmer took a huge toll on his health, and probably his extracurricular activities as well. And then, but on 21st of July 1796, he died, and it was complications of a long-standing rheumatic heart condition, and ironically, a bacterial infection from a tooth abscess. His funeral took place on 25th of July 1796 in St Michael's Cemetery. There was over 10,000 people apparently attended his funeral. Now, if you look, I looked at the statistics to see what the population was in those days. Dumfriesshire as a whole had 33,000 people. Scotland as a whole had 1.6 million, and yet 10,000 people managed to make their way to Dumfries for his funeral. And there was no bicycles, there was no cars. There was a horse and cart, or it was Shanks's pony, your feet. And yet there they were, and his funeral was held 4 days after his death. So all these people managed to make their way for that. Anyway, controversial to the end. He'd said to his brother Gilbert in his deathbed, and apparently he was quite a humorous character even all through this, and he said, "Don't let the awkward squad fire over my head." But despite that, the powers that be decided they need a full military funeral, so that's what he got. And he was buried in St Michael's Cemetery in Dumfries. Now, I think Jim Connor told me this stat, but I checked it myself. There's over 60 statues dedicated to Burns, and he's only third in line after Christopher Columbus and Queen Victoria for statues dedicated to a non-religious person, and that's worldwide. So, quite a character. Now, I'd like to end with a few lines, and I hope this hasn't been too serious. For me, it was a good history lesson, and it might give us something when we think about some of our sabbaticals. It might just be following the route of Robbie Burns could be a good one. Anyway,
I don't think my wife will let me do that.
Well, not that route, no. So I'd like to finish with a few lines of a chorus. Now, I did mention that we used to sing the Star of Robbie Burns. Now, I'm not going to sing it, but the chorus is, "Like kings and courtiers rise and fall, this world has many turns, and brightly beams aboon them all the Star of Robbie Burns." So, gentlemen, please stand and raise a glass to Robbie Burns. Robbie Burns. Thank you.